A very special welcome to you. Yes, indeed. Good afternoon. I'm laughing at the sound of my voice. It's ridiculous. Good afternoon and welcome to Hard Facts here on your number one talk station, 95.1 Nigeria Info. My name is Somi. That's S-O-M-I, short for Somi, holding sway for Kimberly, who's going to be gone for the rest of the month. Imagine that. Oh, well, it's good to be here. As always, thank you for staying with your number one talk station, 95.1 Nigeria Info. You know this is where we keep it passionate, trustworthy, and conversational. And we're going to be getting straight into our roundtable conversations for this afternoon. And today being Wednesday, you know who we have with us here in the studio. Let me say a very special welcome. Good afternoon, Mr. Majid Dahiru. Good to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. You're looking well, sir, I must say.
I'm looking well?
Yes, you're looking well. Yes, let me. In the midst of everything that's going on in the country, sometimes we have to tell ourselves that we cannot look like what we're going through.
Oh, exactly. We don't have to.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You look radiant too. I was going to ask if you have a.
This is not my real face.
Crossed from
where?
From this side to the other side.
Which of the sides are we talking about? Now let's be clear, sir. Well, national radio. Oh well, good to have you here, sir. Let's get straight into our conversations for the afternoon. Quite a number of issues on the table, if you ask me, but some are, just right there in our face. We've gone through quite the week already from matters like the Samoa agreement. We've had quite a number of takes on that one. I think the last thing we saw was while the NBA was trying to allay the fears of Nigerians on that matter, you had the likes of the House of Rep, I think, who called for a should I say a truncation of the agreement. A certain lawmaker was saying that these kinds of things ordinarily should have gone through the House before they were signed. And, but on the other hand, the NBA is there trying to allay fears and saying, no, there's nothing regarding the uproar about the LGBTQ movement. We've also had quite the week with the fuel scarcity that has persisted around states in the country. Although someone called in just before I came on the show and said that they didn't see queues anywhere. I don't know if that was your experience as well. Coming into the station today, did you experience any fuel queues?
There are still queues. There's still some NPC that is close to us.
Okay.
Yeah. There are still queues.
Okay.
But I think they are reducing. They're not as much as they were a few days ago. So probably supply is improving, and I hope it's improving because it is difficult enough to buy petrol at a very high price and having to queue for hours again to buy it. So I hope that the NNPC and other relevant government agencies are on top of the situation to make sure that they quickly clear up these unnecessary queues at these very difficult times.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of the times that we are in, one matter that has, persisted from especially the second quarter of the year had to do with talks around minimum wage. And the breaking news just came out now that it looks like we might be getting a conclusion on the matter, as the federal government, they said, is on the verge of agreeing to a new national minimum wage because our president, as of some minutes ago, invited organized labor, which consists of the NLC and the Trade Union Congress, to a meeting at Aso Villa on Thursday. For some reason, when I saw the headline, I was hoping that the meeting was already in place because the matter has dragged on for so long. Apparently, according to the Punch newspaper, a close source in Labour leadership who craved anonymity made this known to the correspondent of the Punch today. According to him, the president is willing to settle the lingering talks on minimum wage tomorrow and has invited the joint union presidents to a meeting. I would say that is definitely good news of some sort.
Well, good news, but for such an important news, I would have expected an official communication from both the government side and the Labour side on the fact that for sure this meeting has been slated for tomorrow because it is very important. And it's about time, it's even overdue, as a matter of fact, for the president himself to sit down with the leadership of the organized labor in order to fashion out a way forward on this very important matter of an upward review of the national minimum wage, which is overdue. It's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years, and earlier, a few months ago, the last review was 5 years. So right now we're actually out of time. We've overshot the time frame for a review of the minimum wage. And considering the situation in the country today, the out of the roof inflation and the general cost of existence crisis that Nigerians are facing. I don't want to call it a cost of living crisis. I think what Nigerians are facing is a cost of existence crisis because Nigerians are simply struggling to survive, not just to live. So many Nigerians, most of us are now living on the margins of life, on the fringes essentially. So we are battling with the cost of existence crisis. We should have seen more urgency on the part of government to addressing these issues. One of the key instruments that can be used to address this issue is an upward review of the minimum wage to a level that can actually bring Nigerians back from the brinks of just mere existence on the margins of life to at least, minimum standard of living. We're not even hoping for maximum, but at least something that can make us live and just stop existing. So I should have thought, for example, that such an important meeting, because it is important, and it is a good news, it's a piece of cherry news that it's better late than never, that the president has decided to meet face-to-face with organized labor.
Yeah.
That should have been an official communication. There's nothing it shouldn't have been an exclusive to a newspaper because they are quoting an anonymous source. I'm saying because I don't want to hear by this evening that government did not, or there is no such plan in the pipeline. We want to see such thing happen, and if it's just a kite that's being flown, well, Nigerians are eager to see that meeting happen. And like you said, I was even thinking it is happening right about now. So before the evening today, we should have an announcement of a breakthrough in the minimum wage upward review negotiation. Yeah. But well, I hope it is true, and I would want the government to be forthcoming with an official information about this meeting. And we also want Labour, if Labour has been invited for such a meeting, the Labour organization should put out a proper statement confirming this meeting so that people can set, agenda for both parties going into that meeting. So it's important that we have an official communication with regards to this meeting. But if this is true, as reported by Punch newspapers, it is a piece of good news, and I hope that they will have an amicable resolution going forward.
But speaking of setting an agenda, what ideally should we be setting as Nigerians for the attendance of that meeting going in? Because I've tried to do this a number of times, and it just seems like even we can't agree on what it should be when they come out of that meeting. Like, where are we looking at in terms of realistic expectations that we're setting for them when they go into that meeting and when they come out? Because this matter has persisted so long. We don't want to come out and there's a case of deadlock that they're unable to make any agreement again.
Now meeting with organized labor, and so that we don't expect a deadlock. And for the deadlock not to happen, will be for the president, who is the leader of this government, and the president of Nigeria at this time, to actually review upwards the offer that they're making to labor. They need to bring up something that is reasonable, far beyond the 62,000 naira that they're offering. Something very reasonable, something very, very reasonable. Yes, we know that when you go into a negotiation, you don't hope that all your demands will be accepted by the other party. We know for sure. But in this instance, there is an irreducible minimum that the government should not go below in negotiating for a minimum wage for Nigerian workers. I said it because this government has created the crisis today that requires an urgent upward review of minimum wage. And so, bearing that responsibility in mind, and the additional responsibility of reviewing minimum wage every 5 years that has fallen on its laps at this time too. So it's like a double responsibility. If Nigeria were to be in normal times, a marginal upward review minimum wage would have been okay. But we're not in normal times at all. We are not. This is the worst cost of existence crisis that has befallen Nigeria in living memory.
All right.
And so the government must come up must up the ante in the offer they're going to give to labor. Something that is not far below what labor is demanding at this point. And based on that, I believe that labor can accept. And let me say this for emphasis. 250,000 minimum wage is only unrealistic to the extent that it cannot even take Nigerian workers home.
Okay. Hold that thought for me, sir. We need to go on a quick commercial break. When we come back, more on the conversation.
More talk, news and sports after this.
Welcome back to Hard Facts.
This is Hard Facts. Hard Facts.
On 95.1 Nigeria Info.
All right, it's still Hard Facts, and we are on the round table with our revered guest analyst, Mr. Majid Dahiru. And I don't say that lightly because you have Lukman Adebanjo even here on Facebook saying, good afternoon to you, Mr. Majid Dahiru. He says, in his words, the best political analyst I have seen in my life. Very realistic and objective in his analysis. He goes on to say he loves your personality greatly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
I also have Ndukwe Kalu checking in with us. He says, good afternoon, checking in from Abba. And as well, Abel Onu Joseph also on Facebook. He says, welcome, Dr. Majid Dahiru, my mentor. God bless Nigeria Info. All right, just in case you didn't catch it the first time, we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. You can join us for conversations on the roundtable with our guests in the studio while we highlight some of the major headlines in the news. And we were just talking before the break about what's going on in the country, especially as it regards the situation that Nigerians are unfortunately having to deal with. The president has called for a meeting with organized labor to look into the matter and hopefully come to a conclusion on the matter of the minimum wage. And Mr. Majid, just before the break, was giving us some insight onto what the acceptable minimum should be. You were talking about the 250,000.
250,000 can only be considered unrealistic to the extent that it is indeed not realistic for a family of four kids and a wife, father, mother, and 4 children to survive on. Meaning it is grossly inadequate. That is the only unrealistic thing about 250,000 per month minimum wage. In fact, in today's Nigeria, what can actually take a family home comfortably without much savings would be 1 million naira per month.
Realistically speaking.
Even that is, realistically speaking here is okay. It can just take you home, but you won't have much savings. You'll be able to pay your rent at the end of the year, probably in a modest apartment, in a modest part of town. You'll be able to pay school fees without too much of difficulties. You'll be able to take care of your health care that is not beyond certain levels of emergencies, and have a little savings, just a little. So you are still going to struggle, even 1 million naira per month in today's Nigeria. So for those who kept saying that it's not realistic, it's not your responsibility to talk about being realistic. This is a demand for a decent wage. Nigerians deserve a decent wage. And so 250, for example, is not even enough. So I don't expect the president, even if for any reason it's going to come down below 250, it shouldn't be too much below 250. And I've had the arguments about inflation, and I don't know where that argument is even coming from in the first place.
It does seem like a reasonable argument.
It is not a reasonable argument at all.
Why not?
And I've said it severally. An increase in minimum wage cannot cause inflation in an economy such as Nigeria that is already suffering from hyperinflation, cost push inflation, not demand pull. Nigerians are like in a hole. So if you increase minimum wage now, the highest that will happen, for example, is that they come up a little bit in that hole. and begin to have a glimpse of the ray of light. That is all that can happen. They are not on a surface. So if you now give them a platform to stand on, they will now be so tall. That's not where we are. If you pay a decent minimum wage today of say 500,000 per month, the only thing it will do that it will deflate the economy a little bit. That is, people can now comfortably afford basic feeding. That is provided that the exchange rate remains at this level and actually, improves over time. That's also under the condition that price of energy either remains at this level or reduces. Even if you pay 1 million naira to that minimum wage and FX crosses the 2,000 naira mark, and price of petrol or diesel crosses the 1,500 naira mark, that same money would have become as useless as the minimum wage you're actually coming from. This is the reality. So any increase in minimum wage now in Nigeria can only reflate the economy. And for the private sector, they must realize that one of the ways to reflate an economy is public spending. And one of those ways is public spending through payment of comfortable wages to workers, because they will spend this money. And when you spend money, it will boost the private sector, and the private sector will have enough earnings through, enough revenue from this public spending through public service workers to also make enough profit to pay their own workers. As we speak, companies are folding up in Nigeria today because of cost of production and low patronage. Any company that's folded up in Nigeria will give you these two factors as the primary reasons why they're living. High cost of production and low patronage. People can no longer afford to buy the things they could buy 1 year ago. So if you pay Nigerians a decent minimum wage today, it would enable them to buy basics. It's not luxury. Nobody's going to buy a bottle of champagne for 1 million naira because they've been paid 250,000 naira per month minimum wage. No. But at least they'll be able to afford basics, which can go a long way to reflate the economy. And everybody benefits. So it's a good thing to do if minimum wages across the board are increased. And 250 is not too much for the Nigerian worker. In fact, it is not even enough. So thankfully, Labour has come down to 250. Government must do its best to meet up to that demand. Or even if you are going to come down a bit, it shouldn't be anything less than 200,000 naira per month. And any state governor that claims that they cannot pay 200,000 naira minimum wage or 250,000 minimum, or whatever they agree, above 60,000 naira minimum wage a month, should resign. Such a person does not deserve to be the governor of a state. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as we should stop giving excuses for our elected political leadership that have decided to not prioritize public spending for the good of the people. If you cannot pay a decent minimum wage, mind you, Nigerian workers are among the lowest paid in the entire world. Lower than Afghanistan, lower than Djibouti. Yes, lower. I can assure you, we rank so low on the ladder of human development,
indexes,
that our public servants are among the poorest paid. It's something that we should understand. And when you pay public servants this poorly, you are telling them to resort to self-help. So how are you going to curb corruption, indiscipline, and all forms of malfeasance in public service delivery? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to curb? What moral ground will you have as a supervising authority to actually contain the excesses of public servants that are trying to simply survive? How? And so we need to pay attention on this matter and make sure that we set an agenda for the government to raise the bar far above 62,000 naira and find a safe compromise, a comfortable compromise between them and Labour. And let me emphasize again, 250,000 naira is not too much. In fact, it is inadequate. Calculate your expenses in a month. Just your own personal expenses, your feeding, your accommodation, your logistics. Calculate and see whether 250 can take a family of 6 home per month. And I think we have this colonial mentality where we think that those that are at the lower rung of the public service ladder, those that are actually on the minimum wage bracket, maybe your drivers, your messengers, your security, people think that these people do not deserve a decent life. We have become so conditioned or socialized to think that driver that drives you around town does not deserve to live in a decent accommodation, does not deserve to have quality life for himself, his wife, and his children because he's a driver. We have been conditioned to think that the security man does not deserve a decent wage because he's a security man. So when you hear that minimum wage
is unrealistic,
they think that these people don't deserve to pay 500,000 naira a month, or 1 million naira a month, or 250,000 naira a month. People imagine that how can my driver be earning 250,000 naira a month?
But just to be clear on this minimum wage conversation, Dr. Majid, I've had conversations with people who said, look, even though they are pushing for a 250,000, for instance, and they're saying, oh, it's whether the debate about whether it's realistic or unrealistic doesn't even come in. It's a question of, they're saying that this is just a small percentage of the Nigerian worker. And so if you're arguing for the public servant and saying, okay, 250,000 naira minimum wage, what about the private employer? Are you saying that they should pay the same amount as well? There's that conversation as well. So just to be clear, because you have talked about the fact that, the public servants in Nigeria are among lowest paid in the world, what would be the agenda to set, and are we going to be setting different agendas for public servants and workers as opposed to those in the private sector? Let's be clear on this so that we have...
The private sector feeds off the public sector in every country. And so the best way to boost the private sector is through public sector spending. So for instance, if you have workers today that are paid better than they are being paid today, if you have workers that are earning 500,000 per month today, right, they are going to spend this money on goods and services being provided by the private sector. They're going to increase spending. They're going to be able to afford more things that they can afford now because they have more pay. That will go to boost the revenue of the private sector. So in fact, the private sector needs, more than any other entity, government to raise minimum wage for public servants, because that is one way government uses to infuse money into circulation. They do to procurement contracts and then public sector wages. So as small as you think they are, that fraction is actually the instrument, is the boost for money circulation in any country, public sector payments. Because government has money. So they pay their workers deliberately, they pay them a decent wage. Because then they're going to spend this money in the next departmental stores to patronize all sorts of goods and services. Without this purchasing power being raised, the private sector will die. So it is in the interest of the private sector that they should put investment upon government to raise the minimum wage. Nobody expects the private sector to automatically follow by paying minimum wage the government is paying. But over a period of time, their revenues will improve and they'll be able to pay. They'll be able to catch up. Sometimes they will pay even higher than what government is paying, because there is a healthy flow, a healthy circulation of money through public sector spending. So it is imperative that even the private sector owners and operators should hope that government is going to raise the minimum wage. Again, part of the reasons why businesses in Nigeria are folding up is because people cannot afford the goods and services being provided by the private sector. So you have to fold up, because you produce goods and services and nobody is able to afford it. What do? But if there's a raise in minimum wage, this number of people, as small as you think they are, will be able to patronize and boost the economy. So if, for example, the wage bill of Nigeria rises to about, say, 10 trillion per annum, it means you have people that have 10 trillion in their pockets. Imagine 10 trillion being spent in the economy. Most people that are working in the public sector do not have goods and services that they provide. It is the private sector. So they'll be able to buy more. You see, consumption drives production. If consumption is very low in an economy, production itself will actually die out. Because it's going to consume what you're producing. So you need a healthy consuming workforce to spur private sector productivity. Very important. Both of them are tied together and they are mutually reinforcing. So that dichotomy between public sector and private sector is neither here nor there. You need the public sector to be able to produce adequately for you need the public sector to be able to pay higher wages for the private sector to benefit from that increased purchasing power of a sizable number of Nigerians that are in public employ.
Right.
So it is going to be a win-win for everybody. And that is why all over the world, to boost economic productivity, governments have a way of calibrating upwards minimum wage. They prioritize payment of decent because they know that it is important for citizens to have money to spend on basics. These are not luxury items, basics. And Nigerians deserve the good life. We deserve it. And so it is important that the private sector understand this, that it is in their own interest in the long term, even in the short term, for the public sector workers to earn something appreciable so that they can spend that money on the goods and services that they are providing in more quantity. Otherwise, if a time comes today that they cannot afford to buy most of the produced goods in Nigeria or the services rendered by the private sector, they will die out of business. It is natural. There's nothing you can do about it.
Okay. I think we have pretty much touched on the matter extensively in terms of setting the agenda. You have, I was thinking, okay, maybe we can find like a middle ground, but at this point, let's just leave it to the federal government and the president, especially, to sit with Labour and let's hear what it is that they're preferring. Mr. Majid saying 250,000 is not even the appreciable amount per se. It would be basic enough to get us there. But let's see what your comments are saying. Good afternoon, Somi and Dr. Majid. I appreciate the boldness Dr. Majid has in suggesting a reasonable and decent minimum wage for workers. However, unless a miracle happens, we should not expect any reasonable minimum wage from this government, he says. I'm not a pessimist, but since morning shows the day, a serious government will not be proposing 62,000 naira. I support 250,000 naira on minimum pay in Nigeria. This is from Jimmy Odeni. Okay, I would take more of the messages, but we need to get into the second headline that we're looking at today, especially as it sort of ties into what we're talking about. We're getting a reaction from the chief whip of the Senate, Ali Ndume, who is expressing concerns over the rising cost of living, rising cost of living and food scarcity. But beyond that, he's saying that the president is not even accessible for them to have this discussion. He was saying this in an interview with BBC Hausa when he said that the federal government's inability to address these issues is a major challenge. And he added that even ministers are unable to meet with the president to discuss the matter. So it seems like there is a divide, basically. So you have federal government or some members of the executive, as you would have it, if you're going by his insinuations, just saying, okay, we need to really take a different approach to this. We need to have some sort of emergency measure to tackle this thing, but they can't even reach the president, according to him. He said the major problem is that this government's doors are closed. Not to mention, apart from the fact that ministers cannot see the president, he says members of the National Assembly also do not have the opportunity to meet with him and discuss the issues affecting their constituencies. All of this, he was saying in a motion, while addressing a motion to address the food crisis in the country. Now, we know that the World Food Program has warned that about 82 million Nigerians are likely to face food scarcity in the next 5 years. And the senator was saying the aim of the motion that was raised was to draw government's attention to the severity of this food crisis. But it seems like they are not really opening their doors to attend to the matter. Now, I know some people will look at this statement, especially given who's making it, and say, Oga, where is this one coming from? Like, this does not make any sense. What is the Legislative House on its own doing? Do you need to go and have an open door with the president, or do you need to sit with the president for him to? Is the president so far removed from the situation that he needs you to go and tell him exactly what is going on, and that his door being closed is a problem to you? Like, isn't there more that the Legislative House can do to draw the attention of government beyond going to go and meet with the president? There just seems to be some sort of a disconnect here, and I know that it seems like a noble thing for him to say, to say, oh, look, we are trying to address these issues, but this is what is going on. It seems like we don't even have the ear of the government. But I just feel like sometimes they present a sort of handicap. And this is not just for members of the Legislative House. You can even look at it on the side of the state governments. It just presents some sort of handicap as to dealing with the issues that are plaguing us in the country. I remember seeing a report a few days ago that was talking about the fact that year on year, between May of last year and May of this year, federal allocations have increased significantly across the states, across the regions. But what are state governments doing to address the food crisis within their own countries? I know maybe some state governments are doing some things. In Niger State, I was reading today, some sort of agricultural innovations are being going on. Some initiatives are being put in place. But do we really need to be knocking on the door of the president? And is his closed door stance, if we were to go by what Senator Ali Ndume says, is that really why we are not addressing this food crisis in the country?
Okay, first, I think you raised a lot of issues that are very important. And there's something you raised in your analysis of what Senator Ndume said. You said, does anybody need to tell the president what's happening in Nigeria? Isn't that detached from the situation? That is on one hand. So meaning that ordinarily, Ali Ndume does not need to see the president one-on-one for the president to know that his people in Borno South, where Ali Ndume comes from and represents in the National Assembly, are hungry as much as the president's own people in Lagos State are also hungry. That's on one hand. Yes, so you can say that in trying to raise an issue of national importance, such as the food crisis we are faced with, Ali Ndume may have infused some level of partisan politics, which is a clear indication of some of the disgruntled elements within the ruling APC. I'm sure there's this feeling of the president belong more to certain people than to others. So that was the gamut of what Ali may put out there. So, but you can sift through and bring out some of the issues.
Yeah.
So as politicized as his intervention is, the issues remain germane. That Nigerians are actually hungry, impoverished, and living miserably. That is the summary of what he has said. And I watched the proceedings, part of the proceedings in the National Assembly yesterday, both in the House of Reps and in the Senate. And I think I've not seen this 10th Assembly as livid or as alive to the responsibilities, at least as the spokespersons of the people, representative of the people, as I saw yesterday. Even former Senate President Amelan, who is usually very taciturn in his approach, had to come out to speak openly in a manner that left a lot of people surprised and say, can Amelan speak in this manner? Yes, that is because the conditions of the country are beginning to actually get to them. Because their own expenses too have increased. They know. And so, you see, nobody is spared of this trauma that we are going through. No matter how much you think that even they in the upper class are immune from it. Somehow, they are spending more on their personal expenses too. And they have a responsibility that may have quadrupled under the same condition as mere mortals like us. Now, the takeaway there is simple. The president should take urgent steps to arrest the situation. Yes, they have come up with this tariff-free food importation policy for the next 150 days.
150 days.
And such other shorter measures to at least bring in cheap food items into the country so that we can at least survive before we begin to talk about how to rebuild our productive agricultural economy. And you also raise an important issue about the role of state governors in this whole situation. Yes, it is true that whereas the government of a country, federal government or the central government, has the core responsibility of providing security and welfare for citizens. And when you talk about security, it's not just physical security. You also have monetary security, you have financial security, you have energy security that I've always talked about. But most importantly, you also have food security. So in the priority of, in the scale of priority by governments all over the world, you see food and the energy security is something you cannot do without. You may not be able to provide housing security for your citizens, educational security, healthcare security. You may not be able to provide a lot of other securities for your citizens. But there are two securities you must ensure, and that is energy and food. And so the president has a responsibility, primarily, to put in place policies, investments, and programs towards ensuring that. However, the state governments have a core responsibility to drive those processes. Because one, land resources, which is very vital for agriculture, is vested in state government. States have capital too, which comes in by way of monthly allocation, which also alluded to the fact that it has increased over time, increased in naira terms.
At least between May of last year
even though in reality it has reduced because of the factors of production that is actually on the upward swing. But at least they have monthly allocation, and they have a workforce, they have labor, they have a bureaucracy that can drive and help complement whatever it is that the federal government is putting in place. And the question is, what are the clear policies that this government has put in place to drive agricultural productivity across the country? Well, I cannot see any. Secondly, there's also no coherence between the president, and even governors on this party platform. So ordinarily, we expect that the political party will be bound by its own manifesto across board. So, for instance, we needed to go back to the manifesto of the president. What was his position on agriculture and productivity in this regard? So, how is the APC control state under the leadership as the party leader implementing faithfully their own manifesto, upon which the entire social contract to the people and got elected in the first place? How much are they implementing it? There's a disconnect. It's not there. So what you see the Niger State government doing is, well, it's an effort, but it's not done in a structurally institutionalized manner that can endure. I see it more as trying to pander to the gallery. I'm sorry to say this, with due respect to the gentleman. That's what I see, really. Because what we would have seen is solid investment and clear policy directions that would have, by now, yielded its first fruit between last year and this year. But, well, I hope that the nearest future was something good from Niger State, which has, I think, the largest landmass among the 36 states of the Federation of the country. So, largely, all other states are simply comatose when it comes to agricultural production in real sense. We're not seeing adequate investment. We are not seeing, an institutionalized approach to ensuring food security, leveraging on the vast and arable land available to us across the 36 states of the country. We're not seeing it at all. Our governors do not seem to understand that they have a responsibility in this regard. And so, once they collect their monthly allocation, it's party time until the next allocation comes. So this is something that has to be addressed as well. And who better address this than, one, the president of the country, through the National Economic Council, and as the leader of the APC, and leader of the APC states, begin to implement that manifesto upon which they were elected.
I keep smiling every time you mention the manifesto, Dr. Majid, because we know that it's more of a
copy and paste document that was simply used to fulfill righteousness.
To the credit of this current president, I remember reading some excerpt of some parts of the manifesto, and I thought, okay, this looks brilliant on paper. Brilliant. It looks brilliant on paper, but it doesn't seem like there is any move to follow through.
To implement it.
At least not wholeheartedly.
It's when we talk about organs of a party, the National Executive Council, the NWC, the Board of Trustees, the youth wing, the women's wing, and all sorts of, organs of a party. It is for the purpose of driving good governance through a deliberate political process that will be backed by a purposeful administrative procedure. So a NEC meeting of a party, for example, that has members of the governors of the party as members and some select members of the National Assembly, among other stakeholders, is essentially a forum where the president can remind them of the manifesto and say, look, as a government, this is what I intend to do. But as a party in charge of social and so states, we need you to also domesticate this manifesto so it can be complementary with what I'm actually bringing on from the center. I don't think the president has called the next meeting of his party since he became president. I don't know. I'm not sure. But even if he has called the next meeting, I do not think issues of governance featured in that meeting. And this is not about APC. All parties in Nigeria have this shortcoming. Their next meetings are simply political discussion arena.
It's about asserting dominance.
There's no governance issue that is discussed there. None at all. It's as if they don't even know that a NEC meeting is supposed to be where you come and discuss governance issues and make sure that states that are elected on the platform of this party, because of this manifesto, are complying and are implementing these manifestos adequately. And where you need adjustments, it will be raised there, and what needs to be done in terms of collaboration with the center will be raised there too. So the president, as the leader of the party, can actually lead in this direction. This is something that is not being done. We don't seem to understand these issues. And he has a responsibility to lead this party in this direction. The same way other opposition leaders have a responsibility to lead their respective parties in this direction as well. Because we're a democracy. The solutions I can prefer are solutions that are inherent within a democratic governance structure. I cannot suggest extra democratic measures to solve this problem, especially at a time that people are beginning to feel that democracy is inadequate in terms of meeting with their socio-economic needs. And I've insisted that Nigeria's democracy is defective and should not be used to judge a proper democratic good governance structure. One of the richest countries in the world, talking about agriculture, Netherlands, is the second largest exporter of food. Right? Netherlands is about the size of Maryland in the United States of America, just one state. And Netherlands is the second largest exporter of food. It's a democratic country, true and true. The United States is the largest exporter of food items in the world. It's a democratic country. Some of the most developed countries in the world, richest and very affluent countries, are democratic. That's nothing wrong with democracy.
Okay.
That is why we must always dip our hands into the kitty bags of democratic good governance structures to provide solutions to our problems.
August 12 in Lagos. Witness the brightest minds from across the country in a battle of intellect and eloquence.
Have you ever wondered if
This is Nigeria Info.